All right, hello. This is my tutorial slash walkthrough on programming drums. So as you can see, I obviously just deleted the drum track there. Going ahead and label it. This is a demo that I've been working on, and so obviously it's not labeled the best. It is worth mentioning that I already have everything routed and mixed in this project file, so this is simply a tutorial on how to actually program the drums themselves, right? All right, so obviously down here, kick, snare, toms, my effects cymbals, here are my overheads rooms, the trash mic, parallel compression for the drums, my snare verb, snare parallel, and the shell mix. Everything is being sent to the drum bus and then the master. However, since I usually use two monitors, in this case, I'm going to simply move the mixer so we don't have to deal with it at all and have more space to work on the one monitor that I do have to use for this tutorial. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in and give what we have a listen without any drums. I just realized from messing around the other day, the end of all these were a little bit cut off, so let me just go ahead and fill those back in. All right, so that's what we had to do. That's what we have so far. Obviously, I programmed out drums to this, but for the sake of this tutorial, I will be starting from scratch. So, as you can see here, if it will load, we are using the Sleep Token kit. But this kit is routed very similar to any other kit that you would use. It has very similar routing to Get Good Drums, which is what I used in the past. So, yeah. Jumping right in, obviously, here is all of our samples. And so, what I generally like to do is, most of the time when I'm writing a riff, I kind of, to some extent, have a vision in my head already, right? But if I don't, a lot of times what helps me is I will simply start with the kick drum pattern. So since I'm doing this on pattern 9, I'm going to go ahead and lay down pattern 9. And I am going to be programming to the chorus, so I will drag that from the beginning of the riff to the chorus, so I don't have to worry about anything getting chopped off later on. All right, so entering our piano roll, here's our kick. So let's go on ahead. Now we have this here, so we can do a little bit of both at once if we so desire. All right, so I'm going to go through and do my kick patterns. Sorry, my stuff is all out of whack. I don't know, I must have been programming with triplets or something, so I'm just going to slice that so I have an even 4, and then I can go back to that. Also worth mentioning, so for your drums, just a little introductory for actually programming them out, 1/4 of a beat is obviously 16th notes, 1/2 of a beat is 8th notes. So that just shows you how small of an interval that you can get, right? So if I were to do this, I have a bunch of 8th notes, or 16th notes now, right? But obviously I could also do 8th notes just by simply skipping the beats between. And with drums, for these are simply triggers. So even if it's, you know, if I went to none and made it this teeny tiny little note, it's still going to sound the same because it is triggering that hit when it happens, not for how long it happens, if that makes sense. And that's how the vast majority of your drum VSTs are going to be. But all right. So with our verse pattern, I'll kind of just follow along with what the guitars are doing on the bass drum. Oops. All right, so that's our first rhythm. And then I like, with that little riff, I'll kind of open up the drums a little bit. So I know that later on, that won't have any kicks to it. So then... So now I have this simple kick pattern. That kind of follows along with that, right? So usually, once I get to this point of having a measure or two done, I'll throw in my snares. And this VST is actually interesting because you have a separate rim shot and snare sample, right? So that's the snare, that's the rim shot. And so since this is metal, obviously I want really hard hits on my snare. So in this VST, I use the rim shot samples, but it is worth mentioning, again, I used Get Good Drums before. They didn't have them separate. They just had one snare sample. So do whichever one you prefer, whichever one sounds better in your context. But I figured that was something worth mentioning. So now... Right, so now we have that. Going ahead and move forward. Just follow the rhythm again. Take my snare. Obviously the next measure will be much the same. So I know at the end I'm going to be doing a little diddle on the snare, right? So that's why I programmed that way. All right. And obviously, again, on those smaller hits, I tend to use the snare instead of the rim shot. I think it sounds better. Right. So now we have just our simple kick snare pattern. And again, worth mentioning, so in this VST, and Get Good Drums, a lot of the time, I would kind of go what they call turbo mode, where you just turn all the velocities to 100. This VST is a lot newer, and I don't know if it's because it's newer, but the velocities are much more sensitive in the sense of if I were to take, say, these kicks, right? And here's a little trick for you, right? If you have highlighted and you want to change all these velocities at once, highlight your notes and then hover over whatever note you want. Hold down the Alt button, and then with your mouse wheel, you can scroll them all up or down at the same time. But if I were to have them all up, it is extremely loud. And in context, just overall way too loud. So that's why I have those velocities a lot lower for the kicks, and then the snare, same kind of thing, right? But again, velocities are subjective. Do whatever sounds good. That's kind of something that you learn through trial and error. So, moving forward, now that I have this programmed out right, I generally will tend to program out a pretty simple cymbal pattern, and then from there, that's when I'll start doing fancy stuff, right? So I'll go on ahead and just right? So I'm just doing quarter notes there. Right. So now I have in context. Right. And then in this one, right, this cymbal tends to be a little more prominent. And so what I will do is I kind of want like a ba, 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 ba kind of feel to it, right? So every other velocity, I'll turn down a little bit, right, to give it that kind of pulsing feel. And honestly, I could even stand to turn those velocities down a little more, probably, to give it even more. Right. So now, again, we have the first half of our riff. And then we can get a little fancy here, right? So technically the rhythm is ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da, so we're getting some 30-second notes in there, given that this is at 110, right? So I will go in and I will cut my interval in half by going to half a step. Right. So now we have 30-second notes here. And you can even do this to make it a lot more apparent. Kind of what are the shorter notes that are actually 30-second notes and what aren't. And so what I'll do here, right, on these kind of faster is I will accent the first and then kind of turn down the velocities going after. Because when you're playing really fast stuff on drums, it kind of tends to be your first hit will be really hard, but the really fast hits after will kind of tend to fall off on how hard you're hitting. So that sounds a little more realistic. Oops. Yeah. Alright, so now I continue on programming at my bass drum. And then I know these are going to be snare hits, so I'm leaving that. Put that there, and then... And again, I know it looks like I'm like really quickly doing this, but I personally am a drummer, and in my head, I know the rhythm of this riff that's being played, right? So as I'm programming it out, I know it's like ba 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 ka ba 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 rest ba 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 ka ka. So in my head, I can hear it without listening to it. Oh, that is at the wrong spot. See what I'm saying? And so I largely want these cymbals to be the same, right? So since these cymbals are only up here, I will grab just those, come over here, and then the first measure you want them at, I'll have that barely showing right there, and then I can just Control V and paste those cymbals in. And I remember when I originally did this, I had these little stacks in there. So again, even though these cymbals are here, I'll still go through and do it pretty much the same way as if the cymbals weren't there, programming out the bass drum first and then going from there. And it's also worth noting that before I do my bass drum, right, whatever note you clicked on last, that is the note properties that you're going to be using, right? So say this note was this long, right? And I click that note. If I were to go down to the bass drum, I now have a note that is this velocity, which is 100%, and it's just as long, right? Versus if I were to go over here and click this bass drum note and then click any other, it's going to be the same size, same velocity. And so that's why when you see me going to program bass drum notes, that's why I keep clicking this. So then I don't have to manually go in, adjust the velocity, adjust how long it is. I already know that these are set how I like them, so I'll just go ahead and click these. So again, da na 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 na, right? And then I know the snare is just hitting on the 3 or on the third measure of every, or third beat of every measure. So and then I will go on ahead. I had a fancy fill here, so I'll go through how I ended up making that, right? But again, for the snare drum, same kind of thing. Like when I wanted to place a snare hit, I know that's how long I want it. That's the velocity I want it at. I click there. Then I can click here, place that snare drum exactly, the velocity and length that I want it. So for this, I remember I wanted a triplet feel, and in this case, I'm going to have to use the 1/6 beat, although a lot of the time I can get away with using a third beat. But the problem is this is at 110 BPM right now, versus in my head, I kind of program it as if it was in double time. So obviously the metronome is counting 1, 2, 3, 4. But in my head, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So double time. So in that case, I'm going to have to go to the 1/6 instead of the 1/3. So I can do half of what I needed, right? So since I'm programming in a 1/6, right, these are obviously perfect fourths. So I will trim off that end with this slicer tool, delete that, and then click this. So it's set to this length note. So I know I want kick, kick, snare, snare. And then I'll do a little tom fill. Right, so these are da da ka ka da 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 boom ba ka. Right, but obviously since I just programmed it off of the kick drum, all of these velocities are kind of messed up. They're all set to what the kick drum should be set to, and not what I think, you know, the toms, the yada yada, so on and so forth should be set to. So these are all tom notes. Again, Alt, use your mouse wheel, and you can scroll up the velocities. I like when the toms are really loud. Honestly, that's probably just a hair loud on those toms. And then for these two, I kind of want the second kick to be a bit louder. Right, so now we have that. And then on this, we'll go over here. I want that ride. I'll turn the velocity all the way up. I want that to start with that accent, right? So here, on this one, I want there to be an open hat, so. Ba-ba-bum. So those would be eighth notes, right? So I can go back to a fourth beat and grab this. So I want like snare, pss, right? So what I'm going to do is snare, open hi-hat, close hi-hat. So now obviously I want that hit to be a little louder. And then I'll count the two hi-hat chicks leading into that chorus riff. So usually at this point, I tend to usually do like a verse on one pattern, and then I would come over here, go to pattern 10, and then put pattern 10 here, right? And then start programming the chorus from here. So obviously the beginning of this pattern is now right here. So I'm going to program out the chorus. I probably will not be talking much for this part. You can kind of just watch and see my workflow for this chorus. But it's going to be much the same thing where I kind of program out a kick part, throw the snares in, throw a basic cymbal pattern in, and then go from there, right? So. This is worth mentioning. Control, and then click on a note, and it will select everything in there, because I want to raise all these snare velocities at once. And I already talked about how to do that. So, obviously, as you could just see, I programmed out the chorus. So here's what we just programmed out. And so, in this case, since we're ending on a part that has no drums, I would take my kick, my cymbals that I want to use. Obviously, I want those max velocity, bring them back here. And then I could take this pattern out just long enough to have that hit in there, right? I'm not going to go through the breakdown drums in terms of programming them out right this second. I believe these are them. But I will go through them. So what I have going on, right, I did this much the same way. As you can see, this is just the bass. All I did was the bass follows the exact guitar pattern, so I just copied that, took it down to the note where the kick is, so I could also just go on ahead and have that pattern there. So I already had the kick basically pre-programmed out for me, and then I knew the whole time I pretty much just wanted to quarter note slam the china, so obviously that's what's going on up here. And then same kind of thing where what I was doing before, where the snare is hitting on the third beat of every measure, so right, so I did that, and then I wanted a bunch of ghost notes in there just because I think they kind of help fill out, you know, breakdowns and such. And in the original, I also think I had some ghost notes in the chorus, but the thing with ghost notes is really, again, for this, I put ghost notes on the snare instead of the rim shot. And they're really, really quiet notes. I have no idea why it won't show me that velocity. Unless it's so low. Yeah. So the velocity is super, super low. So you can barely hear it. I mean, it is very, very much a nuance in there, you know? I mean, if I sat here and got rid of every single... Whoa. If I sat here and got rid of all the ghost notes... Doesn't make that much of a difference, right? But if I put the ghost notes in, again, very, very minor difference. And obviously, you know, you can turn these velocities up or down to taste. Obviously, I can make them super loud so they're super apparent. But since they're ghost notes, I obviously don't want them that loud, so I had them a lot quieter. And generally, I tend to make ghost notes just loud enough to where you can barely hear them. Then obviously here, just a little tom fill. We're going ahead and... So, ba-da-da-ba-bong. And on that second kick, there's a ride bell. And then, luckily, this VST has a programmable flam. But for those that don't, what I tend to do is, right, I'll take, in this case, since I have a rim shot and then a normal snare, I would go in here, and I found that 1/6 step apart is pretty much the perfect flam. Right, so I'll get rid of these. That's the flam that we're left with. but obviously if you wanted a little more spaced out. So now we have. But obviously, if you don't have the luxury of having, you know, one snare and one rim shot, then you can do both on just the snare. But what you would want to do is make whatever the second hit a lot louder, because the nature of a flam is, you know, it's lamb, and the lamb is a lot louder. And so even in this, to differentiate the two, I could make this quieter. Right, so now you kind of... So yeah, obviously it would sound probably better in other VSTs, to where the snare is meant to be flammed like that. But obviously in this case, I just have, luckily, a programmable flam. So we can go on ahead, listen to the breakdown, and that'll pretty much wrap up this whole tutorial on how I go about programming drums. Alright, so that is pretty much it. That is how I would go about programming out drums. The biggest advice that I have for beginners is probably start out simple. Another good way to get good at programming drums is to pull one of your favorite songs and try to program the drums to that song by ear perfectly, because that will teach you where the kick hits are, where the snare hits are, and where things kind of naturally fall and are played by a real drummer in a natural setting. So that's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and peace out.